Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're doing something a little different. We're taking a deeply personal, almost campfire-style journey all the way back to the winter of 1814. We're going to hear from a man who literally helped build a nation, not from the grand halls of power, but from the stony, unforgiving soil of New Hampshire.
Let's set the scene. Just picture it. We're stepping directly into this wonderfully intimate, warm setting. You've got 69-year-old John Underhill addressing his grandchildren, all crowded around a hearth. His body might be aching, sure, but his memory, it is incredibly sharp. Sharp enough to carry us right back to a time when the very dirt they were sitting on was still a king's colony. He invites them in, saying, "Come, sit close. The fire is low, and the night is long."
Now, what's absolutely fascinating about this source document is how it pulls back the curtain on the way we actually engage with history. While the incredible warmth and rhythm of John's fireside voice here is creatively imagined, every single date, name, location, and battle is drawn straight from rigid, authenticated historical records. It's just a fantastic way to make those hard, textbook facts really resonate with us today. Moving right into Section 1, Life in Colonial New Hampshire, Growing Up on Stony Soil. Okay, to really wrap our heads around the harsh realities of this era, a time when families settled on thin, rocky ground and survived by sheer grit, not wealth, just think about the number 10. 10. That represents the number of children in the Underhill household alone, with our guy John being the third to arrive. I mean, think about the staggering scale of that for a second. His mother had to feed, clothe, and keep 10 kids out of mischief while trying to survive in the absolute remote New England wilderness. Wild, right? So John was born into this totally unforgiving environment on June 20th, 1745, in Chester, New Hampshire. The soil was incredibly rocky, and man, those winters were brutal. But, it wasn't just the elements they had to endure. During the French and Indian War, young John learned his very first profound lesson in leadership. He'd watch his father come back from militia musters, whispering tense, scary news to his mother. But his father quietly carried that massive burden of fear, just so his kids could feel safe and actually sleep at night. As the years roll on, John grows up. In 1767, at 22 years old, he marries his neighbor, Hannah Colby, and she sounds amazing. Quick-witted, dark eyes, a laugh that carried clear across a room, and a remarkably sharp mind for figures. A few years later, around 1774, they buy a 60-acre farm on Long Meadow Road. So they're setting down roots, building a life, taking on a mortgage of sorts, basically doing exactly what so many of us are still trying to do today. Which brings us to Section 2, the crucible of the Revolution, the Battle of Bennington. Literally, right as John is building this peaceful life, the American Revolution completely flips everything upside down. In July of 1777, the war pulls him away from his pregnant wife and his small kids. He answers the call to join General Stark's brigade, marching north to stop the British from splitting the colonies in half. And right before the battle, on August 16th, General Stark pointed at the enemy camp and delivered this roaring, legendary speech. He declared they would defeat those redcoats before nightfall, or his own wife, Molly Stark, would be a widow. Talk about sparking an absolute fire in the bellies of men whose stomachs, as John himself admitted, were maybe a little less brave than their voices. The contrast on that battlefield must have been absolutely staggering to see. On one side, you've got John and the New Hampshire militia. These are ragged, everyday local farmers. And on the exact opposite side, the Hessian soldiers, well-equipped, highly trained, professional German mercenaries hired by the king. You're looking at local guys defending their literal backyards against some of the most professional European troops of the time. So what was the fight actually like on the ground? Well, John recalls the smoke, the screaming, and the terrible bone-rattling percussion of the guns. He tells his grandkids that time does really strange things in a fight, like some moments drag on for an absolute eternity, and others just vanish in a blink. It wasn't glorious, and it definitely wasn't romantic. It was just the visceral, deafening reality of loading your musket, firing, staying with your company, and trying your hardest not to turn and run. But against all the odds, these ragged farmers completely routed the professionals. The level of success here is just staggering. Look at these numbers. They captured 700 prisoners, took 4 cannons, and seized 1,000 muskets. Unfortunately, an officer in John's company was tragically killed that day, which actually resulted in John earning an immediate promotion to sergeant. And that was a title he would wear quietly, without any fuss, for the rest of his life. All right, moving into Section 3,
family on Long Meadow Road, the anchor of the homestead.
Shifting our focus away from the deafening noise of war, let's look at the quiet, steadfast resilience required back on the home front. This sequence perfectly captures the rhythmic reality of a citizen soldier and Hannah's incredible stoicism. When John walked nearly 200 miles to get home from war, Hannah met him at the door. She checked him over carefully for damage, saw he was mostly intact, and then she immediately put him to work splitting wood because the stack was getting low and winter was coming. No grand parades, no marching bands, just an immediate return to the absolute necessary work of surviving. Together, over the years, John and Hannah raised 6 remarkable children between 1770 and 1779, and each one of them carved out their own totally unique path. You had Joseph, who became a very serious farmer up in Vermont. Then there was Amos, a bit of a charming rascal who headed west to New York. You had the sensible girls, Nancy and Susan. Young John, who was actually born in 1776, the very year of the Declaration of Independence. And finally, Jonathan, who went on to build a lasting legacy. Together, this family was really a microcosm of a rapidly expanding, restless young country. Now, I really want to pause here for a second to emphasize Hannah Colby, because she was the absolute unsung backbone of that homestead. She labored through childbirth and relentless, back-breaking farm chores in a house that was frankly never quite warm enough in January, and she did it all while her husband repeatedly marched off to war. Tragically, she passed away much, much too soon at the age of 46. After her death in 1791, the house just fundamentally changed for John. As he tells his grandchildren, the walls simply held too many voices. So, a decade later, in 1801, he finally sold the longtime family farm for $600. He moved to Plainfield to find some new ground and eventually spent his later years living with his youngest son, Jonathan. Which brings us to our final part, Section 4, Legacy and the Republic, Standing on Your Own Ground. This is where everything clicks, connecting John's seemingly ordinary day-to-day life to the massive, macro-level birth of the United States. Just think about the incredible shift this specific generation witnessed. John was born into a king's colony, ruled by a distant monarch who had never even set foot on the soil, let alone knew the names of the people working the dirt. But by the time his grandkids are sitting around that fire, they are living in a brand new republic. What an absolute game changer to witness in a single lifetime, going from being passive subjects of a king to the active, literal architects of the first real republic since the Romans. And that brings us to what might be the most profound realization in this entire text. John tells his grandkids, "I did not fight at Bennington because I was brave. That is simply a man standing on his own ground." Wow. That just brilliantly strips away the whole shiny myth of the superhero soldier, doesn't it? It reminds us that history isn't just made by untouchable generals and politicians in fancy rooms. It's forged by ordinary, everyday people fiercely protecting their families and what is rightfully theirs. John and Hannah looked at a painfully short growing season and stony, unforgiving soil. And somehow they made something enduring out of it. They stood their ground, and they built a legacy. So the question we want to leave you with today is this: what legacy are you going to build on your own ground? Thank you so much for diving into this incredible slice of history with me, and we'll catch you on the next Explainer.